Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is Saturday, August 25th, and we are going to take a look at this weekend's full moon plus a Venus-Pluto square that's coming up tomorrow. So it's definitely a big and important full moon. As full moons go, we're coming out of eclipse season. So the very beginning of eclipse season was all the way back in July. And then we had another eclipse at the end of July, and then another one here in August. And so even though this full moon is not an eclipse, we are essentially looking at a full moon that is coming through an eclipse cycle. So that makes it a little bit more intense. Not only is it a little bit more intense because the full moon is kind of trailing after the solar eclipse in Leo that started this moon cycle, but it's also intense because it is taking place within hours of a Venus square to Pluto. So the Venus square Pluto contact on its own, we could do a video about. It would be something that normally I would be writing about at least once, if not a couple of times within a week. So when you put these two things together, it's quite potent. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video blog. So let's just give you some details first so that everyone kind of has a sense of where this full moon is coming from. So the moon's going to enter Pisces, and it's going to do so, well, let's see here, just early Sunday morning. And it's in Aquarius right now. And then it makes the full moon at about 3 degrees of Pisces. So the sun's at about 3 degrees of Virgo. For those who don't know, a full moon will always involve the sun and the moon opposite one another at the same time, at the same degree. So your full moon here tomorrow is falling across the Virgo-Pisces axis. And for those who don't know about the language of essential dignity, one way that you can very easily understand any kind of transit or forecast is to look at which planets are in which signs. And if they're in their own signs, the planet behaves more like itself. It acts more like its own nature. Whereas if the planet is in the sign of another planet, not its home sign, in other words, the planet will start behaving or acting more like the host. So if I'm in your house, I'm going to start, after a bit, I might start taking on the mood or sort of subtle tone or vibe, of your place. So similarly, when planets are in the signs of other planets, they start behaving or acting like those planets. So right now, the sun and moon are in Virgo and Pisces, neither of which are the home signs of the sun or moon. So they're guests right now. The sun is a guest in the sign of Mercury's home, Virgo, where it is both the ruler and exaltation ruler of Virgo. And then the moon is in the sign of Pisces, which is Jupiter's home sign. What that means is that the full moon, because it involves an opposition, will also bring up the contrasting themes of Jupiter and Mercury. So when that is the case like that, you always want to look in the sky and go, well, how are Jupiter and Mercury currently getting along? Well, right now they are square to one another. Mercury, just turning direct in Leo, is moving into a square with Jupiter in Scorpio. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, a square is of the nature of Mars. And so with Mercury and Jupiter in a square right now, and with the full moon amplifying the power of these planets, you could say that Mercury and Jupiter are having a little bit of a confrontation. What does that confrontation entail? Well, very simply, Mercury rules the rational mind, speech, communication, and to a certain extent, different kinds of technical skills, information, things like the internet or technology. Okay. And then Jupiter, on the other hand, is more, whereas Mercury likes to debate, analyze, take things apart, is more skeptical and rational, Jupiter's job is to create bigger wholes. So Jupiter coheres, brings together. Jupiter is like rain that makes the crops grow. Jupiter is a planet that encourages growth for better or worse. So you don't want a tumor to grow, but you do want your garden to grow, right? So Jupiter, though, can refer to either kind of growth. So Jupiter about growth, about faith, about unity, about making bigger wholes, about bringing things together. So when you have the critical Mercury squaring off with the prideful, big, unifying, expansive Jupiter, often you get into a moment where, okay, so for example, it's very easy to become puffed up about an intellectual or rational position, to become overly dogmatic about something that you believe or profess, like intellectually or something like that, like something that you teach or something that you're writing about or something that you're trying to communicate to someone. Your way of communicating can come off as Zeus-like, which means potentially, especially with Mars, the nature of the square being of Mars, you could come across boastful. You could come across with a big ego, basically. So you have to be very careful of that. This full moon can sort of bring out the big puffed up, ego in us. And especially with Mercury in Leo, which is the sun's sign, there is what's called a mutual reception right now between the sun and Mercury. So Mercury is in Virgo, Mercury is in Leo, which is the sun sign, and the sun is in Virgo, which is Mercury's sign. So that creates what's called a mutual reception, which means that even though they're not conjoined in the same sign, they don't have an aspect to one another. In fact, they're in traditional astrology, they're in what's called an aversion to one another because they don't have a whole sign aspect. We don't look at semi-sextiles in ancient astrology. So they are but despite that, they are connected right now. It's like if I were in your house and you were in my house and we had to get stuff done. We could pretty easily give each other instructions for how to do things in one another's home. So I'm like, hey, I need you to feed the fish, or I need, you need me to vacuum, or whatever. Okay, so tell me where the vacuum is, or where's the fish food. We can do things for one another. So mutual reception means that the sun and Mercury right now are they're here to communicate and articulate carefully, thoughtfully, meticulously, the Virgo side of things. There's skill and craft and technicians kind of expertise in the air, as to-do lists, organizational and kind of executive features coming together. The sun is like the executive or the CEO, and Mercury is sort of like your administrative team. So the ability to pull things together right now, sort of in an administrative way, in a detail-oriented way, is very strong. And so the sun and Mercury are really helping one another in that regard. But you can go back earlier in the month. I did a talk on all of the Earth energy coming through later this month. Now here we are, all of the Earth energy is coming through. And so again, it's a great time to get things done or to just cross things off your to-do list. Mars is turning direct pretty soon, so you're looking at turning a corner and the feeling of momentum swinging and regaining a sense of direction and purpose, and getting ready to kind of gas forward again. So the Mercury and the sun really helping one another, but when you combine that with the square to Jupiter, there can be a kind of ruthless, impatient, boastful, big, and confrontational or even moody quality in the air right now, because you've got a square to Jupiter, and Jupiter is being emphasized by the full moon in Pisces. And the Jupiter is in a water sign, and it's making a trine to Neptune. In fact, one thing that you have to be careful of is so almost like a psychosomatic effect that if you speak too boldly or too sort of brashly about things right now, or get up on a high horse, with Jupiter and Mercury square, that's a possibility. But with Jupiter also trine to Neptune, my gosh, Neptune is like, if you've ever, when I was a kid, there was a thing, right? I grew up in Minnesota, so we sat around campfires a lot, and I did a lot of canoeing and backpacking and camping and stuff like that with my family. And one of the things that would happen, you're sitting around the campfires, you get attacked by mosquitoes. And as you're getting attacked by mosquitoes, there was like lore about why the mosquitoes chose some people versus other people. And we kind of had a joke that the people who sat and complained a lot about getting eaten up by bugs, or who were like really adamant about the bug spray, were just goners, you know. And the people who like sort of didn't pay attention to the bugs were the ones who didn't get eaten. Now that was like, that was the way that a group of young boys also basically made fun of a group of young girls at summer camp. You know what I mean? So this is like my church camps that I went to, because the girls typically at that age, that moment, I guess, the guys didn't want to be bothered having to put stuff on and whatever. And we'd be like, yeah, the girls are getting eaten up because they're so high maintenance with their bug spray. That was like our little thing. So, but it's kind of like that with Neptune in the air right now, where the bigger and louder and more bravado that there is about something, and potentially hubris, well, we know that pride comes before a fall, and Neptune can manifest that fall very instantly. Like your big loud kind of Mercury Jupiter emphasis in the sky right now can bring things crashing to earth really quickly, because you'll just break out in hives, or like whatever the karmic result is, it can be actually rather instant. I'll give you an example. Not long ago, my daughter, who is learning basically how to be a big sister right now, and she's figuring it out. It's a little tough. She clocked my wife in the face with a piece of her puzzle because she was pissed off. She was a little upset, and so she hit my wife in the face with this piece of the puzzle, and then like not even within like a minute or two, she was like running at top speed and tripped and smacked her face in the exact same spot on the edge of where the, what do they call them, entertainment units or whatever, where the TV sits. And she hit her face right on the edge of it. And the funny part about it is that, she was just being so like, it was so Mercury Jupiter, she was just being so high and mighty. And we tried to like, talk to her about her behavior, and she was just like, just like, she just like ran and just crashed into the thing. And I was like, oh my God, that's so instant karma, that the Mercury Jupiter square with the instant trine to Neptune. The environment speaks back really quickly, and sometimes a little subtly, but that wasn't so subtle, but sometimes a little subtly, but it'll speak back wherever there's sort of pride or hubris right now. Be really careful, because it can blow up in ways that suddenly it'll just seep into the environment, and it can also harm other people. So you have to be very careful about that. For example, having a newborn sitting around me right now is like such a nice barometer for my moods and like my tone of voice and everything like that. Because if you're holding a newborn and I even start getting slightly edgy in my voice about something with my wife that I'm whatever, on about, the baby will start fussing. You know what I mean? And then it's like, oh God. But that's very similar to Neptune in the environment right now. The trining Jupiter, Jupiter's got the square to fiery Mercury in Leo, is a bit like a newborn's in the environment. The environment itself can be a little bit like very sensitive like that. It'll give you feedback if you listen. So that's something to keep in mind for this full moon. Now, the other thing is that arguments about values or faith or beliefs can be amplified with Mercury square Jupiter. With Neptune in the mix, it's possible to become really idealistic and puffed up about our beliefs or ideas or our sense of rightness or what have you. Neptune, even though we love to talk about Neptune with regard to things like imagination and altered states of consciousness and whatever, Neptune also is like an octopus. It just wants to wrap like everything into it and just like, bah. So just remember that like Neptune is also like a poison that can take you in and totally intoxicate the whole system. This is why Neptune is often related to autoimmune disorders. Neptune has a way of it's gelatinous, and it can kind of just suck you in. So you do have to be really careful also of the feeling of being right about something, or the feeling that your passion is justified, and the way that it can become subtly very invasive for others. And so, it's okay to be passionate. Jupiter and Mercury together can represent passion and can represent a certain healthy kind of pride and dignity. It's like a good motivational message or something like that. It's the preacher, it's the sage on the stage, and it has also the feeling of real education and learning behind it. However, we do have to be careful that we are not that we give people room to think for themselves and to be themselves and to differ from us. There's a phrase that I like, which is that nobody ever used reason to talk somebody out of a position that they didn't use reason to get into in the first place. Well, we're creatures of reason. We have reason, and sometimes we tout that as the best thing about ourselves, human beings. Oh, we have reason. That's what makes us higher than the animals, or whatever. But it's actually not reason. It's reason combined with compassion. It's reason combined with forgiveness, with grace, and with a sense of equanimity. It's reason combined with the heart. That's what really makes us unique as people. And Jupiter-Mercury square, sometimes it's hard to get the sort of faith body and the mental body on the same page. They're grinding on each other a little bit. And so the temptation is to just feel right about our position and become insensitive to the fact that we might be bulldozing other people, or we might be manipulating other people to our perspective somehow, which is easy to do, because if you're passionate about anything, you can't censor passion entirely. You shouldn't, right? A certain amount of passion is a sign that you have a pulse. So we don't want to get rid of passion, but we have to be listeners. So one of the ways that I've learned to be passionate over time, one of my teachers has said this over and over again, which is to make sure that when someone's talking, and I'm not at all perfect at this by any stretch of the imagination, but to really listen to what somebody's saying the entire time that they're speaking, and not to formulate the response to them or your next thought or thing you'd like to say in response until you've listened to everything. And when we fully listen to everything that somebody else is saying, we enter into a much more, dare I say it, but I think we enter into a much more erotic, sensual, intimate space with another human being. And not all erotics are based on sex or the desire for consummating something physical with another person. To me, what makes something erotic, intimate, beautiful, interesting, all together have a lot to do with the quality of listening that two people demonstrate for one another. It's not, did I hear you? But did I listen? And how can you tell that I listened? It has to do with the quality of response, which doesn't come until we've finished listening. And finishing listening is happening simultaneously to someone finishing talking. So that's a dance that we have to learn how to do. And sometimes, Hermes and Zeus, they have an interesting relationship with one another, where that one's trying to scold and put the other in its place, Zeus to Hermes, and Hermes is trying to trick and dupe Zeus and get away with things. And there's a competition between the two, and even in Greek mythology, you could say. So I guess all I want to say here at the last little portion of this this full moon talk here is that we should also think about real passion is found in real listening. So if we want to say something passionate, or we want to communicate something that we feel is this is the best way to do something, or whatever the case might be, that we can say and be something really passionate without losing ourselves in the sort of blind rush to communicate whatever we're feeling strongly about. So a little bit more control, and maybe just a little bit more listening, which really isn't, in a sense, I shouldn't say the word control, because listening really isn't in control. It's a practice. But when we listen as a practice, it's amazing how easily our speech and response to whoever we're listening to becomes just a little bit more measured, and our passion has the ability to deliver more tangible results in the lives of others and in ourselves when we just take that time, that just a little extra time to be more careful with how we communicate. It's easy to just sort of put the pedal to the metal with Mercury, Jupiter, big thoughts, big ideas, just go for it. So I say all of this, to give us some resources as we each face and integrate these energies, in our lives. So that's a little bit on Mercury and Jupiter, who are square to one another right now and are the hosts of the sun and moon in the full moon tomorrow. So going on from there, the other thing that makes this such an intense full moon is that the square between Venus and Pluto is perfecting simultaneously tomorrow afternoon. So, we could do a whole talk on just Venus square Pluto. But very basically, where Venus represents harmony, balance, beauty, friendship, the arts, an aesthetic quality, balance and fairness in the sign of Libra, justice and truth in the sign of Libra, and also aesthetics, kindness, sensitivity to balancing or harmony in communication or relationships with others. Pluto, on the other hand, represents depth, darkness, intensity, transformation, death and rebirth, corruption, things that are hidden, things that erupt from the unconscious. So, it's an intense dynamic to put those two together. Ra says, natal Venus square Pluto, passion goes deep, depends on what you want to do with it. Very good. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. When you put these two together, here's some of the things that are very common. Death and rebirth in relationships. There's just a little bit of extra edge or controversy or scandal right now in your relationships. So people can reach that boiling point just a little bit quicker, and there might be some repressed or something you've been trying to hold in nice and gracefully and be nice and balanced and tranquil, like Venus and Libra likes to be, like, oh, I'm just like a well-dressed person in a spick and span, tidy, clean museum. I'm just like strolling through life with perfectly matched apparel. Like Venus and Libra can kind of be like that. Pluto and Capricorn is a little bit more ruthless, a little bit more hard, and just let's get real about things. And so, the struggle to maintain that sense of like refined diplomatic grace, that's real right now, and it could bubble over in relationships where you're really trying to keep it level, trying to keep level-headed, but then suddenly the ballet dancer wants to stick the butter knife in between your ribs or something. Just a little, it's like a little, there's a little potential intensity that could just kind of leap through the veneer of polished Venus right now. So you want to be very careful of that in your relationships. Better to communicate what you're feeling honestly, directly, even if it lacks a little bit of tact, than storing it in and then blowing up in the next 48 hours. The other thing is looking where help is needed before something breaks. So this morning, occasionally I'll cast the I Ching in order to just get a sense of what's happening. And I cast for the full moon tomorrow, and I got the hexagram number 28, which is often translated in English as critical mass. Critical mass means that a structure is reaching a breaking point. And the image in the I Ching hexagram is that of a ridgepole sagging to the point of breaking. And it's very important when you sense that tensions are mounting. In other words, the I Ching's instruction here is that superior people have to rise to the superior position. What does that mean? It means when you sense that drama's coming, you have to do the right thing, even if it means compromise or sacrifice. Even if it means, I shouldn't, like, okay, simple example. How many of you have been in a relationship before? Probably everybody. You're in a relationship and your partner's starting to lose their cool, right? They're just starting to flip their lid. And it's happening little by little. Like you see the ship is going down. You know what I mean? And you can see it coming about, 10 steps ahead. But it's trending in that direction. And this, you can tell that your partner is getting swallowed by something irrational. So the rational one in you is like, well, that's irrational. I don't have to deal with that. They're foolish. Like what a way, how unrefined of them to start tanking this way. How, so mentally we can easily spot it and go like, oh, they're getting worked up about something because they're just in a bad mood or they're being really irrational or what have you. And then from that space, we just sort of like maybe just send little pokes here or there, like little jabs here or there, and just, we kind of watch, like, it was like just going to play with them a little bit while they tank, we do that to each other. On the other hand, we may start rationally trying to talk the person out off the cliff, so to speak. Like, listen, it doesn't have to go down this way. You're doing that thing. You're doing that thing. Or the worst thing that a guy could possibly say, I've learned, being in relationship with my wife for 7 years now, is like when she's pregnant, being like, your hormones go all over the place at times when you're pregnant. Bad idea, right? Saying anything that might be true, rationally speaking, that's actually true. My wife will admit that her like different phases of the pregnancy, her body's doing all sorts of crazy things. Is that helpful then? No. Same thing. I learned that when I was like a kid starting to date girls, and like I had my first girlfriend, her moods would change when she had her menstrual cycle each month. And like if I mentioned that in the midst of a fight, like that's no good. Similarly, there's lots of other low blows that we can take in relationships with one another, for men and women, or any kind of relationship, that you just don't take because the direction that a person is heading in is irrational. It's emotional, and that it's okay because we're emotional creatures. We're not just rational creatures. We're creatures of the heart. We can take in so much stimulus from our environment and from different things that we do in life that suddenly, for no apparent reason, no single reason, more like a web of interconnected stuff, we start going down. And it's part of the hormones, and it's part of the body, and it's part of the work, and it's part of the relationships, it's part of the family, and it's part of what you watched on TV, and it's part of your kids and whatever. But if we try to rationally go for, talk someone out of what they're feeling or what they're experiencing, it doesn't work, right? So the simple point is that when you see that coming 10 steps away, you see the fault line, where something more emotional, something more energetic, something just physical, it's not totally rational, is about to go down. And that we're talking about Venus and Libra, the nice rational balanced one, getting just boom from Pluto. When you see that coming, do something emotional or just from the heart to reach in and help. You don't have to be rational. You don't have to talk through why something's happening all the time, or why somebody needs something that you don't think they need, or whatever. You can just be the bigger person. Because you'll need someone to do that for you at some point too, right? We all are like that. So I'm going to need somebody when I'm tanking irrationally because I've worked too long and I haven't eaten enough and my blood sugar is crashing or something like that. I'm going to need my wife to stand there and not say, well, you should have eaten earlier today because your blood sugar is crashing and da-da-da-da-da. And not helpful. What I really need is for her to give me a hug, to maybe help say, I'll clear the kitchen tonight after dinner, and maybe to give me a potato chip or something. God knows. I don't know what. Give me a carrot. Be like, here, eat this. It'll make you feel better. Your blood sugar is maybe a little bit low. Or there's a way, in other words, of stepping in despite the apparent irrationality of what's happening, and offering help and service and compassion to other people before the situation totally just blows up. Now, the reason I say that is, again, I cast the I Ching. What is the first hexagram that comes back? Critical mass. It's where a structure, something that looks nice, that's polished, that's refined, that's elegant, that's designed, that's geometrical, Venus in Libra, is about to break. It's about to fall apart. Diplomacy, though it may represent something better about us, may not be the better option in the moment. You may have to reach into your heart and just be the bigger person. That's why the I Ching says superior people need to rise up and take the superior position, because otherwise something's going to break. So think about that. Really very basic, beautiful teaching from the I Ching, that when something structurally is about to break, people just need to run in and hold the beam up so that it doesn't break. In fact, the changing hexagram line change in the I Ching reading that I did was line number 4, which says, you come to the rescue and reinforce the supporting structure. Order and good fortune is restored, but does your help carry a price? Now, that changing line, of course, that's a kind of commentary translation from, if I remember, it's Wilhelm Reich, is that his name? Anyway, this is one of the translations that I use, and I just wrote it down on paper, and I forgot to. I have a compendium of different translators of the I Ching that's really brilliant. Anyway, 9th and the 4th place, this is the changing line. The ridgepole is braced, good fortune. If there are ulterior motives, it is humiliating. Here's a little commentary. Through friendly relations with people of a lower rank, a responsible person succeeds in becoming master of the situation. That's a way of saying, if you become the bigger person with someone who's acting crappy or who's irrationally tanking in some way, there's good fortune. There's good fortune to step in and just be the bigger person here. It doesn't have to be the perfectly balanced situation for us to step in and help. But if, instead of working for the rescue of the whole, he were to misuse his connections to obtain personal power and success, it would lead to humiliation. So, for example, how about that moment where you recognize that there's an ability to step in and help, but you're seeing it as an opportunity for your own advancement? Aha, I'll step in and be so helpful right here. People will think I'm so helpful. I'll gain so much from everyone thinking I'm so helpful. That's also possible right now because Venus, the diplomat, and Pluto can also represent the underhanded form of help. The gift that you, one thing that I learned studying the I Ching is that there was a tradition, and I don't know if it's still in place or not in China, but in sort of ancient China, where if someone gave you a gift, you would give a gift back in exchange, because gifts were thought of as, in some ways, sort of inauspicious. Because like a gift is like someone giving you something, and in which case it can create a sense of indebtedness immediately. And a lot of the times that's why we say, there's an energy exchange when you buy something pay for a service or something that's very important. Being in donation-based work for a long time, I can attest to this, that if there's some give and take that's needed between people. So when someone just comes and gives you a gift, you might want to be a little careful about it. Well, similarly, the I Ching's changing line here is saying, step in and help, be the bigger person. But it's also saying, but if you have hidden motivations for stepping in and helping, something that you want to gain, there will be humiliation, which means you'll be recognized. Your intention will be sniffed out. This is something that Venus in Libra could use a good dose of, and Capricorn gives it. Capricorn's an earth sign. Earth signs are a little bit more capable of smelling somebody's intention when they walk in a room, whereas an air sign is a little bit more convinced that they could articulate their intentions mentally, and then if someone doesn't like it, they'll just use words and ideas and concepts to sort of shift their intentionality to fit the listener or the other. Air signs think they're real clever, but earth signs sometimes find air signs sort of full of it. And some air signs sometimes think of earth signs as sort of Luddites, or, like people who are just, they have no sophistication. But earth signs sometimes think of air signs as people who are uncommitted. They're dubious, you know? So you have to think about the earth air relationship a little bit too. And just remember that sometimes people offer help and it's not really help. It's something that they want. So there's opportunism also sort of in the air right now that we should all just be aware of and be careful of it within ourselves. Sometimes we want to help and sometimes we're like, I know what I'm doing here. I'm going to help. You know what I mean? So and I can see myself doing it in my own relationships. Okay, here's a classic. I'm just going to be real. Let's be really real for a second. How about, and I'm not speaking just for me, but I think for a lot of people who have been in relationships before, you want something from your partner. You want something from them. So you put them in a good mood so that you can get it. Like, let's say, I don't know, like classic, these are so gender stereotypes, so I apologize for this in advance, but sometimes my wife and I are walking gender stereotypes. So my wife will want me to do some kind of work, and I'll be like, yeah, I'll do it when I feel like doing it, and I will do it, but it'll be on my terms. That's like such a guy thing, I think. At least my other married friends who act just like way too dude-like sometimes are like that. They're like, yeah, I'll organize the garage, or I'll clean the attic, or I'll do this thing, lift this thing, or do this thing you want me to do, and I'll get to it, and then it comes later. My wife is an expert at knowing how to like do things that kind of put me in the space of wanting to do that for her. You know what I mean? Like, and like guys, let's say a guy wants to get physical or intimate with a spouse, or a partner or something. And and not just men and women either. This goes for any kind of relationship. You can do this where you'll do the things like I'll do the things that'll, kind of put my wife in the mood. You know what I mean? And really, it's like about what I want. It's just like I've been planning this 10 steps behind. You know what I mean? I just, being married for a while now and learning more about marriage, I've learned that like this isn't a good way to get things that you want in relationships. Like my wife and I will resent one another if we're doing that to each other, right? And I think this goes for all relationships. And again, I apologize to use such totally stereotypical examples, but those examples do happen around my household. So anyway, but you can see those kind of things happening in relationships, and it's really better not to get the things you want by buttering people up. And it's really not, okay, here's another thing that can happen with Venus and Pluto. Let's say, for example, that there's another one where you want to kind of rationally or intellectually suggest something, some great idea you've arrived at for somebody else, right? You're like, I think I know exactly what they need to hear, what they need to know. That'll just probably make things a little bit nicer for them and secretly for me. So you make a suggestion. Can I just suggest something, right? And sometimes it's very underhanded. Like I've got this article I'd like you to read. Check it out. Article I came across. It was so interesting, and like, hey, check it out. Or like, hey, have you read that? Have you read this? And you read it, and you're like, for real, you could have just come right and you could have just punched me in the face with it. Like, come on. You don't think that I can, you're not telecasting, just you're not just or what's the telepathy, broadcasting, sort of something like that. You're not just totally giving us your intentions in this. Like, I can tell exactly what you're thinking. I don't know what the phrase is I'm thinking of. So similarly, like in sports, right? If someone is playing a sport and it's a strategic sport, and they're making what they're going to do next obvious to their opponent, the person would say they really aren't very good at this sport. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we could say things like that in our relationships? Like we could just be a little bit more honest and open about the fact that we're constantly, in different kinds of subtle power plays with one another. We could just be like, oh, come on, that one wasn't subtle at all. Glad you thought it was, but you know what I mean? This happens a lot. We could be passive aggressive with one another and try to say something by suggesting or subtly, and we think this is diplomatic and sensitive and nice, but Pluto in Capricorn is like, that's not nice. That's arrogant. That's not nice. That's dishonest. That's not nice. That's vanity and selfishness, right? So now, on the other hand, sometimes there are reasons to be sensitive, diplomatic, cautious with how we communicate something. There's tact, there's care, there's thoughtfulness. Those things are important. And despite those things, someone can actually be enraged and intensely mad if you're doing your best to be tactful. And that's no fault of yours for trying to be kind or trying to be balanced in how you communicate or how you try to get something across or how you try to do something. If someone is envious or jealous or bitter or resentful on any level, they often try to tear down the thing that they admire or desire or wish that they had. And so sometimes it doesn't matter how tactful you try to be. If someone's pissed off and they don't like you, they want what you have, they're jealous or whatever, they're going to try to just, rain on your parade, And so you also have to be aware of the space where reason and diplomacy ends. There's not room for it. So Venus Pluto can be about terminating the attempt at diplomacy. Just saying, nope, it's not going to work. I'm done. Can't try anymore. Similarly, how do we reconcile the spiritual value that many of us place on not being our bodies, right? We're not our bodies. We're spirit souls. We've been around before this body, we'll be around after this body. So this is these things that define my psychology, my personality, my heredity, my genetics, my karma, my destiny, all of these things are, they're material. They call them upadhis in yoga philosophy, which means they're temporary material designations. How do we balance the fact that in this world, there's a lot of unfairness, cruelty, and injustice surrounding our upadhis, surrounding the way that we treat one another racially or in terms of gender or in terms of socioeconomic status. There's a lot of unfairness that exists in the material world. It's not going away, but that doesn't mean we should ignore it. We should do something about it, right? Most of us probably feel that way, that we don't have a high level of tolerance for disrespect, unfairness, cruelty, especially based on things like one color of one's skin, or if one was born attracted to one type of person or another, or anything. So, but at the same time, isn't there it's such a fine line between the cause of justice and the cause of fairness and beauty and truth in the world regarding these kinds of things, and the need to also step away from being overly identified with any of that stuff. Because again, we're spirit souls. We've inhabited many different situations, many different bodies, many different sexual inclinations, most likely. And so how are we to balance the fact that in some ways, all of those things can entangle us, and yet we can't be indifferent to injustice or unfairness in the world. So some attention to our material designations, some careful, thoughtful engagement with the material world and its fairness and unfairness is also important. In general, that's not an easy thing for most of us to figure out. And it usually goes to one of two extremes. One is that someone says, you're not your race, you're not your gender, you're not your sexual preference, you're something spiritual. Emphasizing that is just like a reverse form of racism or prejudice. Getting stuck in that is just ignorance, just as much as the person who hates on people because they're this skin color or that way. So, that's one extreme. The other extreme is, of course, so someone in that position will just say, you're spiritual, not material. So just, leave all of that stuff behind. No sense of social justice or social conscience or something like that. But then someone can collapse onto the other side. And the other side will be someone who thinks that they mistake spiritual life for the fight against material injustice and the evils of the world. So they're endlessly caught up in the polarizing of the world, and they pay no attention to or have no respect for the idea of being a spirit soul and of being somewhat detached from this worldly stuff, and to the point where they will even attack people who are spiritual, suggesting that if you're not fully engaged in the fight against evil in this world, and that's not what you're totally identified with, then you're bypassing, you're irresponsible, you're just as bad as a Nazi or whatever. So it could go like two extremes, right? Right now, we may also be learning how to balance those extremes within ourselves. I think we all struggle with those extremes within ourselves. I think we have voices like that inside of ourselves. And I think that way too often, they play out in these predictably polarizing ways, and especially in social media where everyone loves to, it's like you remember the arcade game where the little prairie dogs would pop up and you'd take the plastic hammer and bop them back down, right? It's like, how many times do we see those same exact conversations coming up in different social media feeds about different issues? And when you see them, if you're like me, you get to a point where the conversations are so predictably polarized in these two directions. You're not any of these material things. Oh, really? You don't think that justice and fairness is a part of the world? That's why spirituality is actually evil and dissociative. Like, and every time it pops up, I just feel like I'm going boom, boom, boom. Like, please just make these conversations and their predictable warfare just go out of my ears, because it's so exhausting. But let me just say that even though it's exhausting, for me, it's more exhausting to be dealing with it within myself constantly. You know what I mean? That's where the actual exhaustion comes from. It's not from dealing with it in the world. It's not from dealing with it on the street with my neighbors when I walk my dog in the morning. It's not from dealing with it. It's not even the social media stuff that I encounter all the time. It's dealing with it within myself, of feeling like, how do I help and care about the right things in the world that clearly matter, that are like, there's clear like battle lines drawn in the sand in certain ways, but then also recognizing that if I'm on that channel too long, I start forgetting that who I am as a person has nothing to do with so many of the temporary material designations that describe my life. I think we're all like that. And Venus in Libra square Pluto, in some ways, gets down to the essence of that struggle in society, within ourselves, and so forth. I don't have an answer to it. I wish that I did. And I think that something that I think about a lot is that in the Platonic philosophy, opposites and their tension never go away. In the material world, the world of duality, those opposites, they're not resolved finally. The tension is either more or less intense or relaxed. And when it's relaxed, it's possible that there's not a lot of creative juice flowing. And when they're very tense, it's possible that there's stress and conflict, but it's also possible that there is great creativity. So in Platonism, the tension of the opposites are responsible for birthing a third. And to me, in the theological language of the Trinity that I grew up with, and in Trinitarian sort of numerological/theological values from all around the world, the third is always a really important note to find in our lives. And I don't know how we find it exactly, but a really good thing to think about right now is the image of the ridgepole sagging. There's tension, it's there. And there's something that needs to be done to strike a third, just to hold the middle place, to hold it up. And it's a creative place that we have to find. It's not easy to find that place. And it requires holding and being in the tension rather than collapsing into an easy solution or becoming opportunistic or blaming or rationalizing, rather than being in the heart as well, and as in the mind. And it's not an easy moment with Venus Pluto. So my thought, though, again, is just that the tension between these things spiritually in the world, the fairness of the world and the good and evil fight in the world, that's real. And then there's also this place where we really have nothing to do with it. And somehow we have to hold the tension between those two things in the way that we live. I believe that's actually the essence of what it means to live a yogic life. So, not that I have it figured out or anything, but the more I learn about that tension in practice and in living, the more I feel that I draw closer to like the littlest spark of a glimpse of what intimacy with the divine looks like. We find it in the world. The world is consecrated and broken open for us constantly, pouring out the divine. But we also sometimes the world becomes very dead the more literally we take it, in which case we have to go away from it for it to be consecrated and opened up again. And it's a balance like that. So at any rate, that's about everything that I wanted to say today. Oh, the changing hexagram of the I Ching leads to, let me just pop it open. Second hexagram that changes is 48, the well. So the well is an image of that which is at the center of a town that feeds everybody in the town, that nourishes everybody. And that the town can be changed around, the I Ching tells us, the organization of the town, but the central location of the well can't be changed. It's common to everybody. Everybody draws on it. Everybody needs it. And right now, it's important with Venus, Pluto, and the full moon and the potential kind of intensity of Mercury, Jupiter, to not think so much about being right, to not think so much about being perfectly poised or balanced, but to think about what is it that we all need? Where can I find a common source of nourishment with others? And how can I bring my practice of spirituality into the tangible efforts I make to bring peace into my environment without any extra motivation? It's like the well is a place, again, that we all go to and that we all need. And so the well is not a, the well is an image of something that's unlimited in the sense that there's always something there to be drawn from everyone. Everyone can go and drink from the well, and everyone needs a source like that. So it's easy to forget that in the high courts of rationality that Venus and Libra can represent. So as we're trying to work our way through whatever tensions may come up, right now, it's important to think about, how can I bring this situation, this person, or these people with me? How can we go to that well? Like, how can we meet up there and do our thing together there? So at any rate, I hope that this has been helpful today. I'm going to look up and see if there's any questions. Okay. I think people want to feel validated and safe during a meltdown. Yeah, exactly. Like it's always better to just say, I hear you, or I'm here for you, or whatever. We know, we all kind of know this. Never to blame it on their diet. Me to my husband. Yeah, exactly. Totally. Keats poetically recommended looking into her eyes and letting her rave. Keats, that's funny. This is, and I can certainly be the her in that description. Sorry, like so many unintended gender stereotypes that came in today, but I have to say that, like, I find that stereotypes are oftentimes, what I've learned about stereotypes between men and women is that they're really just stereotypes of yin and yang, and that yin and yang are applicable to all different kinds of relationships, not just men and women. So that's the way I often think about them. But I always try to be careful about using gender stereotypes, because I think that they can obviously be unfair and reinforce things that don't need to be reinforced. So let's see what else here. Does your help come at a price? That's great. Good. Excellent. The higher road. Women usually gets a ring from her future husband. Right. It's a very basic part of the arrangement that, these kinds of things. And I went to a Christian school, and the Christian culture that I was in, there was a saying in that in their freshman or sophomore year, girls had this saying called "ring by spring," and it was a joke. It wasn't serious, but it was a joke because so many people, they would come to school basically looking to get married, you know, and so everything that they would do would be to socially posture themselves in a way to get married, and it was really sort of toxic, and that's why everyone made fun of it. But that's very Venus Pluto, by the way, just the, you know, and this is old too. This is like, you know, the you know, nice Libran way of trying to getting something that you want. It's an old archetype. I am on YouTube. Yeah, you can search my name, Adam Elenbaas. Let's see. Manipulation works but comes back to bite later. Bonnie, love your message today. As humans, we all have been passive aggressive in our relationships. Yes, absolutely. Time appropriate. Oh, good. I'm glad it's hitting the right place. Thank you, Adam. Needed to hear this today because I'm totally crap after all these eclipses. Right? It's eclipse season, you know. It's hard. It's a tough moment for everyone. In toddler land, we have this saying that my wife and I use, which is you're having a hard minute. You're having a hard minute right now, because we're trying to reinforce for my daughter some little bit of sense of time and how quickly things can come and go. You're having a hard minute. Anyway, this speaks loudly within my mind. Each of our actions, for good or small or big, matter. Yes, excellent. Katie, good to see you. Isabella, thank you. This talk had me checking myself and my intentions already in a relationship. Integrity, the grand earth trine may help with this. Right, the grand earth trine, didn't even mention that. Generally speaking, I'm not great with things like asteroids and grand kites and all of that kind of stuff. I'm like a more of a old school Hellenistic classical astrology kind of guy. I like the 7 planets. I like a little bit of bread with my butter. So I'm just kidding. No, I obviously the grand earth trine, I did speak about the grand earth trine, though not overtly, earlier this month when I talked about the plethora of earth energy coming through. It's my ego. I just refuse to use words like grand and kite and key and yod, or just like all of those words for me, I have to act like I'm above them. So like part of the illusion I need to maintain of some sense of intellectual. So anyway, well, I hope you guys have a great day today. Have a beautiful weekend and happy full moon to all of you. Take care. Bye.